Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Headlines on member-supported Restoration Radio. I'm your host, Stephen Heiner, and with me, as always, are our guests, His Excellency Bishop Daniel Dolan and Father Anthony Cekada. Your Excellency, Father, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Nice to be here.
Before we get into the detritus that we have to sift through for our listeners, Your Excellency, perhaps start us with a prayer.
Thank you, Stephen. We're recording this on the feast day of St. Gabriel of Our Lady of Sorrows. And I thought not so much of prayer, but rather what the Protestants, about whom we'll be speaking today a bit, would refer to as a devotional. Let me read to you some of today's epistle from St. John. Dearly beloved, I write unto you, young men, because you are strong, and the word of God abideth in you, and you have overcome the wicked one. Love not the world, nor the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the charity of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world is the concupiscence of the flesh, and the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life, which is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the concupiscence thereof, but he that doth the will of God abideth forever. Thanks be to God. St. Gabriel of Our Lady of Sorrows, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
It's interesting, Your Excellency. I think of St. Gabriel, 5 years in a religious life, like St. Aloysius dying very young. But 5 years, what a small price to pay for eternity.
Indeed, indeed. And they say, had he not out of humility burned all of his letters and notes, he probably would have been a sort of a male version of the Little Flower. But as it is, his life is full of very up-to-date and very applicable lessons for us today.
Well, we will find out more about him in the future, Your Excellency, in the distant future. We can find out from the man himself. So we are going to continue our theme that we did in January. This is for the month of February. We'll take a few stories from the news, and His Excellency and Father will comment. And I suppose what has been in quite a bit of headlines this month has been the so-called Green New Deal by the Trump of the left, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's a media superstar and a digital native, so she really knows how to use Twitter and Facebook and all these things to her advantage. But again, to give us some historical context, Father, if you could tell us what's the Catholic attitude towards the original New Deal? If we're talking about a Green New Deal, how would Catholics look at the original New Deal?
Well, it's an interesting historical consideration. So reading a little bit about it today, and of course the WASP establishment in the United States, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, really historically had nothing but contempt for Catholics and for the Catholic Church in their ascendancy, as it were, the Protestant ascendancy and their control. However, some of the Eastern Protestant WASPs decided that, well, they needed the Catholics, the Catholic vote, really because of population considerations to get into power. So they tried to cultivate the Catholic vote, especially the labor vote, and tried to get certain churchmen to go along with the idea that what they were doing was fundamentally consonant with Catholic teaching. And they succeeded in that. There's the very popular New Dealer, the Catholic Father Charles Coughlin from Detroit, who at first was a big supporter of Roosevelt and of the New Deal, but eventually turned on it. So the New Deal was presented as something that was very appealing for Catholics, the different social programs that the benign government was supposedly going to give them. And I know that in the case, say, of my grandfather in particular, he had generally had no use for the wealthy. He was an immigrant and he was a coal miner, but he was very much taken in, I remember, by Roosevelt and the so-called New Deal because of its different programs. But we would, of course, we later find out that those are directed toward more and more government control and eventually have sort of a socialist end to them.
Yeah, I think that this is wishful thinking on the part of the dogmatic left, Stephen. They wish it could be considered in some sense as a New Deal, sort of along the same lines or the level of what Roosevelt was able to bring across. But it's simply publicity getting. Maybe it's a little bit of their, if they believed in Christmas, it would be their Christmas wish list, maybe a Hanukkah wish list. I don't know. But that's about the extent of it. It's just more propaganda from the extreme left, which is now, in some sense, if not in the ascendancy, at least they're in the news.
And the other thing is that the people don't know enough about history really to know very much about Roosevelt and the New Deal anyway.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And that the program that it actually consisted in, and so it is in fact wishful thinking.
I think I'm just struck by the entire use of the word deal. The New Deal was a legacy of the Square Deal that Theodore Roosevelt had offered to the American people. And I guess Americans need deals.
That's a deal I have for you.
we want to know we're getting a deal, and that was part of it. And some Europeans will tell me, they'll point to Medicare, Social Security, all of which are legacies from the New Deal, and say, see, America can do socialism too. They just need the right kind of leader. And I try to point out to my European friends that for Americans, socialism, no matter what the media tells them, whatever the New York Times tells them, is just not supported by the majority in any form. So this idea of whether socialism has actually been tried, all of these other things, those arguments fly in Europe, but they really don't fly on the front porch or on the white picket fences in the United States, even now. The Green New Deal itself, for anyone who wants to subject themselves to a tiny bit of pre-Lenten penance, which is Lent's just around the corner, so there's always an opportunity to bring some penance in. If you want to read through the bill, it's not terribly long, but it starts by listing out all of these great disasters, leading, I guess, from the very first given fact. It leads that the special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the November 2018 Fourth National Climate Assessment found that. Statement 1, human activity is the dominant cause of observed climate change over the past century. And then it goes on to list all of these things that have followed on from this asserted fact. And then it swerves into, how do we respond to all of these great disasters? Well, we need to mobilize people, as the New Deal mobilized people, and give them jobs, make sure that everyone has health care, et cetera. And you think the Trojan horse of the Green New Deal, everyone can get behind the planet, and then it's being used to put forth the socialized program. So I suppose that's the first thing, Your Excellency and Father. What's a Catholic attitude towards man-made global warming? Is there one, can we say?
Well, I think, first of all, I have to say, Stephen, and I can't resist saying, there was something in the news about this wretched Ocasio-Cortez says that, well, now she's not really sure if she can have children. Well, if she's, that's, of course, that's a relief to everybody else, because you wouldn't want any more of them running around the planet. But then everybody it's a bit like, well, we all, just before the program started, we all just went for Kleenex and handkerchiefs because our noses are dripping because it's in the spring here. Well, but if we were Christian Scientists, we would feel guilty. So if you belong to the green religion, you'd have to feel guilty because you just read in the bill to us that human activity is the main cause. So therefore, let's get rid of the human activity and save the planet. We'd all probably have a short list of some humans whose activity could maybe be curtailed, and we could do some good that way. So you see right at the beginning, just the very first point, how ludicrous, how ridiculous, what a waste of time and of human, well, it's a waste of human activity, isn't it? Even to talk about this stuff. But it's very germane on the other hand, because Bergoglio and the bishops concentrate on, isn't this their religion? This is the Novus Ordo now. This is the new world order. And they're totally una cum, one with the crazy Democrats who are now so well represented in Washington, and this awful Alexandria in particular, this green religion of the worship of the earth, the pagan concept, all based, as paganism is, on myth. It's all based on myth, not on science, but on myth. And it is what it is. It's a reversion to ancient paganism with modern, dressed up scientific theories that have never been proved. And it's all false finally at the end.
And in order to impose this particular religion, what is necessary is, in effect, the socialist program, which is one that's based on control. So the liberals may say that religion should have nothing to say really about the principles that a secular state follows, but this is in fact their own religion that they'd be quite happy to impose on all of us here, and we would have to observe very fastidiously all of the different practical exhortations this new religion, new morality gives us, or else we will be punished.
Well, they'll brook no disagreement, and in fact, I've heard the term climate denier, Father Cekada. And
oh my goodness!
And I think
bad enough to be a Holocaust denier, Pache Bishop Williamson.
Yes, well, when you're a denier of something, it's this idea that this is settled science, this famous phrase, settled science. Everyone knows it. You're a denier. You're a caveman. You don't know what you're talking about. And it's a way to belittle your views before you even have a chance to share them.
Belittle your views and then arrest you and carry you off, as they're just about doing now in some countries.
Well, yes. I happen to live in a country where you can't deny certain historical things.
Yes.
But then, so it leads on. Humans have caused all of these problems, and then the bill proposes global reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from human sources of 40 to 60% from 2010 levels by 2030, and net zero global emissions by 2050. So
I thought stop giving press conferences. I think that's the first. That's the first thing.
I look at this. I say, okay, let's pretend this could happen. And how will you legislate the volcanoes when they erupt and they throw this up? What will you do to the Chinese or the Indians? Do you think that they're going to listen to your Green New Deal? This idea that
the cows and their emissions, that would still leave the volcanoes. You're quite right.
Yeah.
It's a difficult. Mankind doesn't have a prayer, as it were. Well, they certainly don't. But what you said earlier, Stephen, that's it, isn't it? About the connection with the Novus Ordo religion and all of this green religion. That is to say, it's the idea that man created the problem, man can control the problem, that everything is under the control of man. And it's exactly what you get in America when there's one of these mass shootings someplace. Who's ever behind them? It's another question. Well, what's our response? Well, we have to hold hands and probably candles. A candlelit procession would be good on us. Weep. And then the next thing is we have to have a law. Let's have a law. If you have a law, you'll take care of everything, because we're all we've got. Man is everything, and the government is our God. So therefore, if the government could make a law, we could make this world of ours perfect. And indeed, by 50, we could reduce our emissions to zero. It could be done because man can do all things, because man is God. And there is no God except for man.
And the response to that is, well, how's that working out for you so far?
Well, I mean, obviously the eugenics Rockefeller solution, I think, Your Excellency, is the quickest one. Just get rid of us.
Get rid of exactly.
We're the problem here.
One of these days, someone's going to think about that, and Ms. Cortez is pretty close to that now, I would say, as much as she could be said to think. She's moving along. She's making progress.
She needs to study up her Margaret Sanger. She's not well written.
Oh, indeed, that would be an interesting subject.
But actually, it seems like satire, but there are already environmentalists that I've read about who said, well, definitely man is the problem, and that we have to reduce the number of people on the planet because we, in fact, are all the problem.
So we're back with eliminate the man, eliminate the problem, Father.
Yes, and in another, I think there was the head of another socialist paradise.
Another socialist paradise.
The guy with a mustache and the gulag who recommended that.
Well, and I think a site that we mentioned on our last episode, Babylon Bee, said that the internet breathes collective sigh of relief as Ocasio-Cortez announces she won't be having children.
Indeed. There's always some good news each day.
So, as I said, the bill is actually uses the green movement, this idea of climate change, as a Trojan horse to again create narratives of division, and as Your Excellency alluded to and Father alluded to, create divides in our society as it goes through and says that we need to respond with mobilizing the economy. It lists that it's a trifecta, really. You have to admire, Your Excellency. They managed to tick all these boxes. The greatest income equality since the 1920s, with A, the top 1% of earners accruing 91% of gains in the first few years of economic recovery after the Great Recession. B, a large racial wealth divide amounting to a difference of 20 times more wealth between the average white family and the average black family. And C, a gender earnings gap that results in women earning approximately 80% as much as men at the median. And I thought to myself, even someone with no agenda or maybe no ideology would come to this bill and say, I thought I was reading about the Green New Deal, and now I hate rich people, I'm racist, and I'm sexist.
Good, you got it all. It's covered.
Those are your dogmas.
Those are your gods, O Israel.
Yeah.
That's the sacred teaching. Let's work on this then.
I'm reminded of the idea of someone had said that the greens are like watermelons. They're green on the inside, but they're red on the inside.
That's pretty good, I would say. Yes.
The idea of the red here isn't just the red of socialism, but I would say the red of blood. I think the reality, Your Excellency, is what are they after? There's blood that's going to come from saying that there's a gender earnings gap. Again, this is the sort of fictional earnings gap, that, black families and white families, that there's some purposeful inequality here. And again, what a shock. Top 1% of earners earning 91% of gains. I can't imagine why rich people make money. That's such a shocking idea.
Objectively speaking, of course. Objectively speaking, yes. And of course, it runs to red, and it's all about the red. The revolutions always are about the blood. You can't disassociate this, which happens in Washington, with the other great movement now, Stephen, which is that of slaying newborn babies. That also runs to red. And what are these outrageous proposals, whether they be economic or government or concerning life itself? What are these outrageous proposals, if not the infallibly defined dogmas of the left? Consider how many people take this stuff seriously. Of course, a lot of legislators never bother to read anything. They just vote the way they're told to vote and hope they can get reelected and retire with a pretty good bank account. But the reality is that it is all connected with blood and is most offensive to Almighty God. And could anyone ever claim that the Catholic Church, in the dogmas which she proposes for our belief, anywhere is near in the way of stretching maybe human credulity, say from a non-believer's point of view, as that of the standard dogmatic Democrat today? I think that's a reality, and we have to connect these things together. And it is all blood.
You've come on to a couple themes that segue into the next news point that I wanted to talk about. The idea of President Trump giveth and President Trump taketh away. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean he giveth things like this line from the State of the Union, and let us reaffirm a fundamental truth. All children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God. This would be something that could come from the pulpit, St. Gertrude's, on any given Sunday.
Sure.
And then he wants to lead a coup in Venezuela, mm-hmm. and has intimated as such, and also his administration is arguing for the decriminalization of homosexuality. And then we find out he's also pushed the vote for defunding Planned Parenthood. Mm-hmm. In a certain way, we don't know whether to rejoice or to be sad. But before the show, you were saying that there's a fundamental issue with Trump, and it's the way that he makes decisions. And what was that, Your Excellency?
First of all, we have to say again, as in the previous program, that, Trump is presenting us essentially with his conservative credentials. What's a conservative? A conservative is someone, again, who changes more slowly. He has no principles. The principles are to go along, to get along. Maybe he sincerely felt this natural human truth that it's wrong to kill babies. Maybe he blundered into it, and somebody said, wait a minute, Mr. President, this is a really popular stand in the heartland of America. Let's put this up the flagpole. They're going to salute. In any case, he's going to stay with that theme now, and he's thrown a little bit to the people in middle America with this partial defunding of a little bit of Planned Parenthood, some millions of dollars, which is a drop in the bucket as to how much funding Planned Parenthood actually receives. But don't be mistaken by any of this. This is all show, or maybe it is sincere, but it certainly isn't. It certainly is not thought through. Because why do we worry about American babies and we don't worry about the Syrian babies whom we killed, or the Yemen, or are they Yemen or Yemeni babies whom we're paying to kill right now? Is a baby is a baby is a baby if you have a principle. But if you don't, then let's go forward to regime change and sort of callously, in a calculated way, try to get popular support for our position here at home.
Yeah, and one of the other things that came up when we were talking about this earlier is that, as you say, he may feel this. He may feel this way. It may be a political thing, etc. The inclination with Trump, obviously, is as they would say, he's no rocket scientist, and he's not going to think through like some sort of medieval scholastic the different principles that need to be applied. He's operating on the level of emotion and operating on the level of gut. And of course, this has obviously a great appeal to Middle America. The different things that he's been talking about, the little list that you just read for us, as contradictory as it was on a number of points. Nevertheless, he may feel this and and ride, as it were, to success on the other people who don't think things through either, and who feel very strongly, let's say, about the abortion question.
I think it's important to note for our listeners, Your Excellency and Father, that this is modernism in our daily lives. So if people think about modernism as something religious, this has to do with Vatican II and doctrine, that when you make decisions based on emotions and you can change and you have no principles, no fixed principles, this is what it looks like out in the world, out in politics, when you have a president who goes with his gut. And that gut was probably quite successful for him as a real estate developer in New York. And if you've read the 2 books that came under his name, which I have read, he's very much a gut guy. But I don't know, I think, Your Excellency, I don't know why Catholics want to think that Trump is, quote unquote, our guy. They won't question facts or assertions. I was reading Bob Woodward's book on the president, and this, just a short passage, someone who went to the president when he was considering running as a candidate, this was probably in 2012. You've got some problems on issues, Bossy said. I don't have any problems on issues, Trump said. What are you talking about? First off, there's never been a guy win a Republican primary that's not pro-life, Bossy said. And unfortunately, you're very pro-choice. What does that mean? You have a record of giving to the abortion guys, the pro-choice candidates. You've made statements. You've got to be pro-life, against abortion. I'm against abortion, Trump said. I'm pro-life. Well, you've got a track record. That can be fixed, Trump said. You just tell me how to fix that. What do you call it? Pro-life. I'm pro-life, I'm telling you.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you can't make this up.
It sums it up.
And it goes on to say what his charm is. I think you put your finger on it, Father Cekada has. So Steve Bannon was in this meeting. He says Bannon was impressed with the showmanship, and increasingly so as Trump talked. Trump was engaged and quick. He was in great physical shape. His presence was bigger than the man and took over the room, a command presence. He had something. He was also like a guy in a bar talking to the TV, street smart from Queens. In Bannon's evaluation, Trump was Archie Bunker, but a really focused Archie Bunker.
That's good. That's pretty.
So I think I think that's part of it that appeals to Catholics, Your Excellency, is that straight shooter. This idea that I'm gonna tell you what I'm thinking. The problem is that half of the time what he says is wrong. It's wrong for Catholic morality. It's wrong for basic principles of just war, objective natural law. And so we, as Father Cekada says, we have this swerving of news because, as you pointed out, he's being guided by sentiment.
Yes, and well, if you talk about the average Catholics or the average Novus Ordo Catholic in Middle America today, a straight shooter, wow, sounds good to me. He's not going to get that in church on Sunday, that's for sure. He's not going to get that from the bishops to whose different campaigns he contributes each year, that's for sure. Where's he going to hear it? So he tunes into some stupid show like Fox News in hopes that he will hear it there. Trump is enough of a salesman, he's enough of a successful businessman to know those things just on a gut level. He couldn't intellectualize them, but he knows them. So he appeals to what people want. What do people want? They want a savior, riding on your white horse and save me. That's why the French fool around with the great monarch, and that's why you have your monarchist story hour. And Monseigneur Duc Paris, this and that, and the other thing. Someone is going to come and save me, or Trump is going to come and save us and make America great again, break out the hats, or break out the little crowns for the Gâteau des Rois. There's going to be a crown. Someone's going to assume the power and fix everything in some facile, simple way. Don't look behind the screen where the wizard is operating the keyboard. It's essential that you not do that. You mustn't be allowed to do that. A show like this actually is simply to lift up the curtain a little bit so you see what Togo first led us to, what's going on there with the wizard. That's what people want. All across the spectrum, you see that today. And when you oppose their mythologies and their errors, people will, basically good or decent people, will get upset with you. They don't want to hear that. That's extremist. That goes too far. It's out of my comfort level. But it objectively speaking, what we say is true. And what the church has to say is something else again as to what is going on and being promoted today on all levels.
Yeah, as you were speaking, and as we were talking about Trump and the attitude that people have toward him because he's supposedly a straight shooter, etc. It's the Jews in the Old Testament wanting a king. And the king is going to be all of the solutions, is a solution to everything with all the different tribes around them. And so finally, God breaks down and gives them a king. But that's precisely the danger with someone like Trump, that then people stop thinking and they cede all reason to what their king has chosen, what their king is doing. I think we said it the last time, though, that when it comes to politicians, our attitude has to be simply that it's all nonsense, and that we faithful Catholics, should be in the business of trying to pick someone who will do the least harm to us. And if we can accomplish that, fine. The least harm to us.
Do not waste the message has to be, do not waste your time on all of this stuff. The reality is, as Father says, they insisted on a king. They refused the Son. They refused Christ the King. Again and again and again, they refused the kingship of Christ. So you get an Ocasio-Cortez and the Green New Deal and Trump with these different Trumpisms, and this is our punishment. This is the punishment of man today, because he refuses to submit to God. And he demands a human king in his image and likeness, whether it be some duded up French fellow over in Paris, or whether it be Trump, God help us. People want their king. The leftist Democrats today, with their severe doctrines of baby killing and utter government control over every facet of your life, and eliminating human beings finally altogether. That's our punishment. That's what comes to us today. So that's why you can't, in a sense, take it all very seriously, as we said in the last show. And on the other hand, don't take it too seriously. Don't spend too much time on it. Just kind of glance over it a little bit. From time to time, I would say, get yourself a good a good analysis of what's going on, so you know what really is going on, but then spend your time on something else.
Yeah, I would say that he has a bit of a Cekada-esque turn of phrase sometimes on Twitter, and he is good for a few laughs too, Your Excellency. When Elizabeth Warren announced her candidacy, he wondered whether she was going to campaign as the first Native American candidate,
Yes.
and then he ended his tweet with "See you on the campaign trail." And he all caps
no one said it wasn't amusing, but if politics is not amusing, what purpose does it possibly serve, aside from enriching politicians?
I mean, if they were all like Jimmy Carter, more much from the whip.
And Melez.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
I was thinking as Father Cekada was talking about our Lord giving the Israelites a king, that, our Lord was trying to save us from politics. And we wouldn't listen, and the Jews, as many times, they wouldn't listen to our Lord. And okay, we got that. But as you pointed out, nolite confidere in principibus, we should not put our trust in these people and not get too wound up about that. However, people are being wound up about Venezuela, and to tie us back to what we were talking about with socialism, is it proper for the U.S. to encourage overthrow of a government in a country, in a continent that's with a country that's not even a direct neighbor of ours?
No, it's a direct violation of the moral law for America in its capacity as an empire to interfere in other nations. That's the law, that's the principle. And then look at the practice. Look at the sad list of countries that have undergone, at the hand mostly of Republicans, a few Democrats, but mostly Republican rulers in America, have engaged in a regime change. And we leave each country a shambles. Well, Afghanistan is bad and probably will always be bad. But then look at Iraq and the Middle East, the position of Christians there. Look at Northern Africa, Libya. Look at what's going on now in Yemen, Syria, and now Venezuela. Of course, one shouldn't have a Marxist dictatorship that leaves people starving and lacking for the basic necessities of life. But what's the real picture behind the scene? It's American mandated regime change for empire building, and nobody cares about the little man. That's all just propaganda. It's global propaganda. We should stand very firmly against that.
But that's the story that sells, Your Excellency. And Father, the idea, Ivanka Trump had brought some pictures of the so-called children that were so-called gassed by the Syrians to President Trump, and so he gets upset and launches 59 cruise missiles without verifying whether
yes,
that.
It's the story that sells. Yes, that is absolutely. But it's also the story that sells. Trump knows this then, as we said before, that you mustn't kill babies, fresh little newborn babies. They can't be killed. But then on the other hand, there's a nice gay couple next door, and why really couldn't they get married? They should be able to get married too, just as I've gotten married.
I know them. They're great guys. They're great.
They're really great guys, and they're fine people. And then I could get married 5 different times, and why not? And I'm a good person too. And why can't I go to communion?
So, yeah, it all goes back to the emotional level, to emotions. And as you say, and as I guess we've said a number of times, it's modernism in a daily life. It's my individual experience, my individual take on something. These things seem nice to me. These appeal to me. Therefore, they are good. Therefore, societal ideas have to change, and objective principles have to be tossed out.
Yeah, I often say to some of my Trump supporting friends that Trump's a huge supporter of marriage. He's done it 3 times.
Yeah. Yes.
You had mentioned before the episode something that I hadn't been plugged into. As I say, I'm really plugged into the news for this series, but not normally. So I will try my best to gather some stories that are of note. And you brought something to my attention that I wasn't aware of. And if you could tell our listeners about what's going on with Methodists in the United States.
Today there was an interesting development. The American Methodists narrowly defeated a move by the Methodist equivalent of the Democrat Party, that is to say, militant, totalitarian imposition of gay marriage and gay everything you could possibly imagine, in a not very gay way, of course, with the old meaning of the adjective. It was narrowly defeated because of the influence of the Africans, of all people. Because the Africans told the Americans, we don't need you coming over and tell us that we need to change our religion. We have our Bible and we know our faith, and we don't approve of any of this. And so the liberal wing was defeated, and all of what's left, you have to say this, what's left for the Methodists, as for all of the Protestants and the Novus Ordos, because they've given up the indissolubility of marriage, and they've given up the principles, really, that would condemn all of this gay business. They don't possess those either, because they all engaged in birth control and various sins against nature themselves. But what's left, the kind of a Trumpist, centrist, American homeland idea, which is perfectly represented by many a Methodist congregation in the United States, I think. They voted to resist this pull to the left to submit themselves. This would have been sort of the gay New Deal as opposed to the Green New Deal. This is what's going on in the headlines today. The Green New Deal is still supposedly on the table. I don't think it will get anywhere. And the gay New Deal, for the Methodists at least, the followers of Wesley, has been very narrowly defeated thanks to the Africans. Ex Africa lux, you wonder, is light going to come out of Africa? I think that's an interesting sort of a non-colonial and very non-racist idea, isn't it? I wonder if our little faker from Chicago, Smollett, is that his name? The fellow that faked the hate crimes, are always faking hate crimes because there aren't any. And they require a hate crime to get things stirred up again.
The people he hired were from Nigeria.
They were from Nigeria. So that's not exactly light coming out of Africa, but I'm glad to see Nigeria in the news. Nigeria has a great future ahead of it under Father Nkomo.
You know that they were wearing MAGA hats?
They were wearing
MAGA hats.
No, Father, they couldn't find them, so they just went to a store and bought red hats. They were just wearing red trucker hats.
Make it up.
But then they said a black man in America is so oppressed that he has to hire 2 Nigerians to attack him. This is the state of affairs in the United States. At least there's some employment for the immigrants there. I think that's a positive thing.
A few times it's like standard Novus Ordo worship. It's a circus. It's a joke. How could anyone take any of this seriously? And yet they do. They frown and look serious, and they're pained, and they're suffering. They're suffering. I think we're taking the correct response as a gleeful mockery at all of this nonsense, and it should be laughed at. It should be pointed out and laughed at regular intervals.
Yeah, Bishop Sanborn and I were talking about this in Francis Watch, about how irony and sarcasm and turning their principles around on is sometimes the best response to show its lack of logic, because it doesn't it shows the absurdity to which it can be taken. So this Kamala Harris creature, she announced that while she's in favor of reparations, that we should make reparations to blacks. So I got on Twitter and I said, well, I'm a Slovene, and my Slovene ancestors were oppressed by the Habsburgs. So what I'd like is 40 acres, you can keep the mule, 40 acres somewhere near Salzburg in Austria, please. And this might sort of satisfy the injustices that were imposed on these Slovenians, who ended up, having to eat cornmeal mush while the Habsburgs were feasting.
What was great, Your Excellency, you missed this because you're not on Twitter, but Father tagged Edward Habsburg, who's the Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See and one of the heirs.
I haven't heard back from him yet, but
maybe one of those things. I think it's important to note, as you said when we were discussing this news item before the show, Your Excellency, that this is really just a hollow victory. The Africans may have carried the day, but their house is built on sand. They're Methodists, and I Googled to check. Would you believe there's 80 million Methodists worldwide, 12 million in the United States, that there are this many people who subscribe to this scattered creed?
Indeed. At the end of the day, sure, they may have moved a little bit towards some remnants of the natural law, but at the end of the day, they're all heretics, and they're all going to hell because they're heretics. So a Catholic has to think, I have to get busy. What am I doing to promote Catholic truth? What am I doing to pray for the salvation of these poor souls? It is at the very best a Pyrrhic victory.
You had alluded to this Jesse Smollett character who, if people didn't know, you can go online to read. He faked an attack upon himself and blamed it on Trump supporters, and which has spawned a multitude of memes. As I think I said on a previous episode, the internet does know how to do its memes, and would say that all these evil characters, let's say Darth Vader, all these people came and attacked him, and they were wearing MAGA hats. So you had like Darth Vader with a MAGA hat, attacking this person, and they were reporting it on Twitter. But by the same token, so this is, and you had alluded to it in our previous episode, the unforgivable sin. There was an article, and it's come up on more than one occasion, that John Wayne should have his name removed from the airport in Orange County. For those who don't know, there's 5 airports in the Los Angeles area, one of which is in Orange County, and it's called John Wayne Airport. And why? Because John Wayne said some intolerable things, Your Excellency. He said some things that could not be forgiven. And so in an effort to make reparations, we have to remove his name. And this controversy happened long before this series started, but in past years in the United States, there's been a big rage about statues. Yes. And the need to remove our statues. And how should Catholics look at this historical revisionism?
We should look at it for the sheer nonsense which it is and which it represents, which is not to say, on the other hand, that this or that, say, Hollywood actor or historical character or war hero was entirely praiseworthy, but it is to say that the left, in using these things, is entirely promoting its own agenda, and they must be resisted every inch of the way.
Because it's symbolic, and it is a fight over symbols. It's a symbolic fight, and that is the that is they are big on symbols and on symbolism, and they're big on hatred of history and of stuff from the past, and therefore they have to be resisted. The absurdity of going and retrying all of these people in terms of their modern dogmas. What about Grant on the $50 bill? He hated Catholics. So should he be removed from the $50 bill? They have this different kind of revisionist history where they want to blot everything out in the past that runs contrary to the dogmas that they're professing now.
It truly is Orwellian, isn't it? It's the memory hole. Everything has to go down. Everything has to be changed. Everything must be politically correct. So therefore, we have to oppose that each day by reading a little history, by reciting some poetry, by learning the life of Grant, or indeed a little bit about John Wayne. We can go a long way towards addressing these lies. And then, as Catholics, it's our duty to put it into a Catholic context. And that's what these kinds of shows are meant to do.
For our listeners who aren't familiar with Bishop Dolan, you'll note the aplomb in which he manages to mention poetry in a show about politics. So, as always, well done, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. I couldn't resist.
If you note the interview that John Wayne gave in 71, a few of the quotes made me feel that he was a bit too much of a believer in America in the sort of 1950s glory way. He said, "Movies were once made for the whole family. Now, with the kind of junk the studios are cranking out, I'm quite sure that within 2 or 3 years, Americans will be completely fed up with these perverted films."
Yes, don't we wish?
Well, he wasn't much of a prophet on that one. I could say the old
1971. Yeah. He's saying this.
But then, if you want to talk about John Wayne, how glorious. He was converted to the faith. He died a Catholic through the influence of the Blessed Virgin Mary and a nun. And of course, his wife, I'm not sure if it was a valid wife or not, but she was a Mexican woman who was a Catholic. The different influences and a happy ending to the story. So by all means, keep that airport named after him, Stephen.
So with the Duke in our rear headlights, the other thing that seems to be in our rear headlights is the Gilets Jaunes movement here in France. I had thought when you and Father were talking about how we can look at our politicians, I was thinking actually to Clovis and the birth of the French monarchy, that the French will romanticize Clovis, right? So he was baptized, and obviously that was a wonderful thing, led by a saintly wife and a saintly bishop.
Mhm.
But his line did not, let's say, convert in heart, right? They may have converted by baptism, but it took centuries for them to stop murdering each other. And
And this line made Planned Parenthood seem kind of pious and pro-life.
the Merovingians were not a kind of cuddly and warm royal family. And this idea that Catholics, if we don't read our history and we're not familiar with Catholic principles, we get this wrong idea that our leaders can need to be perfect in order to serve the will of God. And I think you pointed that out, not just in sermons from St. Gertrude's, which if you want to get some of His Excellency's takes outside of this series, you can go to sgg.org and listen to some of the sermons. But this idea that God can work with whatever is given to him, and providence can bring good out of evil. So Trump will act erratically, but there's still possible avenues for good. And that's what we should focus on instead of trying to defend things that are not defensible because he's quote unquote our guy.
In that sense, then we should be conscious of the need to pray for him so that we are protected, at least in some sense, and that some good things happen. He could be, on a good day, a bit of a Charles Martel figure, speaking of of French monarchy, Stephen. That is to say, I was just reading the other day about a saint who got into trouble with Martel because he objected because the king was confiscating church income. And this poor saint was exiled from one city to another. But because of his sanctity, he kind of survived. And Charles Martel, for all of his faults and all of his many, many wars, nevertheless repelled the Mohammedans from almost the heart of France. And it stayed that way. They never came back. It was a glorious moment in French Catholic history. I don't think Trump is going to be any Charles Martel anytime soon, but we have to count. If we have to count our victories in pennies, so be it. This is a hard age in which we live.
The Gilets Jaunes running out of gas, Your Excellency and Father, I think come around from what we've been talking about, this idea of sentiment. The weather is getting nicer now, and so who has time for a protest? And as the numbers have been steadily declining, they continue to say, "Oh, there's something," but really, people have moved on. Whatever solidarité may have come up recently, and I'd asked some French friends about this. They say, "Well, we had that liberté and égalité thing. We've been working on that, but the fraternité thing, we've never gotten it. That's the Christian side of things, and we're not very Christian anymore." And I thought that was incisive self-analysis, which is unusual from the Frogs.
It is quite unusual for the French, now that you mention it. And of course, let's not bring up the fraternity in connection with behaving in a Christian fashion, because you don't always get that. That's been my experience, leaving liberté and égalité aside. But they're right. I mean, you can understand the cynicism of a politician. Make a few town meeting style assemblies of the French, let them vent a little bit, get some press on your side, wait for the weather to change, wait for the mushroom crop to come in. I don't know, the cheese. Pretty soon there's going to be Bougelet Nouveau, and you're good. We survived the crisis, Mr. Macron. Ça va. We have survived. Now let's move on to something else. Politicians know this, and they count on it. So do newsmakers, for that matter.
There's always something delicious around the corner, Your Excellency.
In France.
Even with Mardi Gras around the corner. It's not a big tradition here, actually. I'm going to be celebrating it with some friends. And they said, well, and I was explaining to them something that we had talked about on previous episodes, and shameless plug for a new series that I've been doing with His Excellency called Back to Basics. But the reason you'd have pancakes or crepes on the Tuesday before Lent is because you weren't going to have access to butter, eggs, or milk. So you better use them all up now. And what better thing to do than to make pancakes? So, Your Excellency, as we've been talking about all of this, as always, we could go on longer, but I know that you have many things to do, and Father does as well. How would you like us to wrap up today's episode as we've touched on conservatives not really having a solution because they have no principles, the swerving of President Trump, and the falsity of the Green New Deal.
Let's conclude by staying with the Mardi Gras theme and the pancakes. Let's think a little bit about what comes the next day, which is Lent. I think Lent is an excellent time for those and you may have some among your audience potentially, and probably there are some Catholics in this category who could define themselves as news junkies, or even the people who simply live all of the time with their cell phone in the palm of their hand. And it's always the latest news. Did you hear so-and-so said this, whether in your little world or in the big world, whether it's manipulated news or fairly objective news. It's draining. Lent is the time for everyone to take a step back. I started by reading a bit of today's epistle from St. Gabriel of the Mother of Sorrows. My ending today would be it's always about the same. And some of these divisions and categories we've suggested in the program today, I think if we meet again, God willing, next month, we'll also be in function. What everybody needs right about now is a dose of the good news in order to survive. And I can't help thinking of a French anecdote in connection with Saint Therese of Lisieux, the little flower. In her Carmel, the mother prioress, Mother Gonzaga, was a bit of a character. And she spent a lot of time in the parlor gathering tidbits of news and gossip from the town of Lisieux. And very often at recreation, she would introduce these subjects, and that would be the topic of discussion at the recreation. And I think of St. Therese, on the other hand, carrying the good news in a little pocket in her habit over her heart. She had a gospel. She had the 4 gospels, and she read them and she meditated them. Lent's the time to do a little reading. Lent's the time of spiritual renewal, and for everybody to get a little bit away from all of this. If you get away from it and then you go back to it, say at the end of Lent, guess what? You wouldn't have missed anything, because it's always, always, always the same. If I can make a plug, our Father Lectoranda here is always reprinting books by means of a little association called the St. Jerome Library. And he's just reprinted a very nice edition of Prayers and Meditations on the Passion of Christ for Lent by Thomas à Kempis. That could be a good book of spiritual reading. The 4 Gospels themselves, especially the Passions, are highly recommended for spiritual reading. Whatever you do, we're in the Lenten season now, or just about. Take a step back from that news and plug into the good news.
As I think with anyone who's ever given up anything for Lent, Your Excellency, that the big surprise at the end of the 40 days is you're wondering, why hadn't you done this sooner?
Exactly. Yes.
Although with apologies to, I think, Father Cekada trying to give up smoking one time for Lent, that this was rather more of a penance than some of his fellow tenants could bear.
It ended up being a sort of, shall we say, an other-directed penance.
Certainly was a penance for the other clergy who lived under the same roof.
But thankfully, Father has managed a way to kick it, not necessarily using Lent, but other means. But I think that's an excellent way to end our episode. Not that our listeners should come to our next episode hungry and ravenous, having given up news for Lent, but to consider that would be a good thing, not just for religious reasons. I know some seculars, people who are not believers, who use Lent as a springboard to improve themselves. So if some of our listeners are not Christian or not Catholic, just give it a try to see how it goes. And that when you come back to look at these news items with us in a future episode, you may have some new, fresh eyes to look at them. As always, Your Excellency and Father, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be with you.